Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast where writers sit around, drink tasty beverages, and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. There will be rants and raves and opinions that may not agree but are lovingly delivered. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's gallery includes Karen Brinchley and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 174, interview with Martin Treanor. Welcome, Martin.
Hello. Hello from Lisbon.
Well, all the way from Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal. We are so glad to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure.
I almost want to say, how did such a lovely Irishman end up in Portugal? Is this a place to retire for you?
Well, the Portuguese and the Irish people are pretty much the same. We get on well together. Ireland has rain. Portugal has heat. So which one do you choose? You choose the heat. For example, today we're what? At the minute, I think we're 18 degrees. Earlier today, we were 25 degrees. So, I'd rather have that than rain. And no more snow.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you.
It snowed briefly in California. We were all very, very disturbed about it.
Yeah, did everybody go out and look at after that? Sorry, I was just going to have to laugh here. A couple of weeks, about 2 months ago, they had about 2 centimeters of snow up in Braga area. They do get a bit on the mountains, but it came down a little bit. And there was like 15 minutes of a news program on this. And they were interviewing this guy and talking about hard to get through the traffic. And it was so funny because I used to live in Denmark as well. And they do snow.
Well, they do snow. They also do a lot less sunshine. So I can see how you might want to come south a couple degrees.
Yeah, I'm here. This is where I want to be, where the heat is.
Well, you wrote a lovely book that I really enjoyed reading, The Logos Prophecy. And that's new out this year, January 2023, right?
That's correct. Yeah. January 26th it released, yeah. I
thought it was fun because you brought in, again, you're only one of a couple writers that we've run into so far that are already willing to bring in COVID is existing. And you are you're only really the second one that really has brought up and used common everyday conspiracy theories as an actual plot driver. And I love this.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
It's your Logos Prophecy. It's a little bit of a thriller, a little bit of a supernatural. So I guess I would say supernatural really is that kind of modern urban fantasy, and yet it not fantastical elements, not science fiction, but urban supernatural really kind of has its own genre, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a thing. Well, as a writer, everything essentially to now, everything's been done to death. And if we don't blend, we're not going to get a decent narrative that people want to follow. Because at the end of the day, it's about readers wanting to be entertained, and they need these. This is where they get their television from and Netflix. So the diversity of input that they get, we have to mirror that. We have to do the same thing. Plus, it makes for a fun read, hopefully for the reader, but it also makes for a fun write.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I could see elements of, I had to go out on a limb and presume you've read Umberto Eco and Dan Brown out there.
Umberto Eco, he's one of, it's always the one thing. What is your influences to this? Foucault's Pendulum and Baudrillard.
Definitely Foucault's Pendulum, maybe, Name of the Rose with a little bit of the just conspiracy and we mustn't let anybody know. And yet I almost wondered, have you watched, it's a show that I found on Netflix called Inside Job?
I haven't. I've been referencing it a lot because we have an overlap.
I think you're going to love them. Go out and watch it. It was only out for a couple seasons.
What I have done is I have collected them up.
Excellent.
And there's going to be a lost weekend. So.
I can see that of sitting and binging that because I have been enjoying binging Inside Job the same way I kind of enjoyed reading your book of what if there are these groups out there that, have this ability or that influence it different ways, and not really the Illuminati, because in Inside Job, the Illuminati are more run by Hollywood, but yours was fun. Yours was saying, okay, they have conspiracy theorists out there who are literally tearing through, like Ari. Did I say the right name right? Ari Long.
Yeah.
Is a conspiracy theorist. And you have another character, Jordan, who's really a science and physicist guy. But somehow they had that little bit of, and we'll just call it quantum connection and ways of being connected, that instead of two photons that are blending together, that these two have been brought together. And it's so much fun, the adventure you send them on.
Yeah, it's the old thing about quantum entanglement and certain particles not actually sharing potential across the vast of the universe, but actually be in the same particle. And where does that overlap? And where does that come into consciousness? Sorry, that's a very serious thing. I don't want to make it that serious, but it is all about that. The idea was this conspiracy stuff, but there's an general under trend, I hope, came through in the book of a consciousness shared, if you know what I mean.
It absolutely is.
Not, the idea is that that's what drives everybody, to this, what they're doing.
I was almost wondering, and I'm going to recommend if you haven't, we had just interviewed Nancy Kress. She wrote a book with Dr. Robert Lanza called Observer, and it had a similar idea of how quantum entanglement, how our observation of the universe controls what we see and what everybody sees, and how we all have this shared hallucination that is the universe. And I'm like, your novel fits into hers is a little bit more science fiction on that side, but yours is like, I could actually see how it is all part of the same universe, and it was nifty.
But the idea is with this is in the third book, we should be exploring that more. So the first book takes place now. It takes place, as a matter of fact, it started yesterday on the 24th of March, 2020.
I noticed that this is indeed, in case anybody's wondering when we recorded this, we have just passed the vernal equinox.
Yeah, and that's when it started. So that takes place in the present day and the events that unfold. The next book takes place 13,000 years ago, when the events that are alluded to in this book took place. And then the last book, the third book, takes place like thousands of years in the future, which I was hoping to explore at that time more of this concept, the Feynman, everything that Schrodinger and Heisenberg and stuff threw into the mix. And the idea of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, in that, is there an observer necessary for the creation of matter? And is that where wave collapse comes from? These are things that I used to study and whatever. But
before you were then a writer of genre fiction, tell us about young Martin. And were you an engineer? Where did you come from?
I've done a million things in a million ways. The nutshell was, I started out as a workshop technician, mechanical engineer, and making and designing and making research equipment in universities. I went on to teach a bit, and then I packed all that in and started doing bars and running bars. Where in Denmark with friends of mine, we did bars, basically big bars. And then I went into the book business for a while, and it was in academic sales for quite a while, and then dipping in and out of exam allocation and exam delivery. And so I've kind of hopped around Europe a bit, and I've done a million different things. And the great thing about it is that I did them for long enough to actually get the feel of them.
Yeah.
And I hope that came in. I hope that came into my writing in some way as well, because I hope I met a lot of different people who have different traits, and I hope they come out in the characters,
It adds depth to them. And I think that shows. I mean, I think it made a difference.
I was actually wondering, did you actually go visit like Cambodia? Because you made me desperately want to go visit it now.
No, sadly I didn't. We were due to go. This is also, and I have to mention this is also a brainchild of my agent, Pastor. He died a year and a half ago. Sal Nancy, he's been a long time in the book industry. He used to be one of the guys at Random House Canada and stuff like that. And when I was working with some stuff with Ed Greenwood, one of the guys behind Forgotten Realms, I was out at Ed's house in Canada, and we spitballed this idea.
Uh-huh.
And then we forgot about it. And then Sal came to me a couple of years after that and said, do you want me to be your agent, and do you want to develop this idea? So we did. Now,
Wait, pause a second. You had an agent approach you because suddenly there's a whole ton of us who are desperately jealous. That's fantastic.
yeah, he approached me because we had spitballed the idea. If we hadn't spitballed the idea, I don't think so. He was a bit of a conspiracy geek, the same as me. Not a believer, but a geek in that I am so fascinated, like that rabbit hole that you fall down. It's fascinating, the breadth, the extent of conspiracy theories, how they conflict each other, and that seems okay as well, and the sheer belief system that goes around them. So we were all in on that, and that's when he came to me and said, I'll represent you. But basically, at the end of the day, he's only represented me for the thing he wants to do as well.
Well, still.
But anyway, short story long, as they say, he lived in Cambodia for quite a while. So he led me through the streets, if you like, and Google Earth.
I love any book and writer that makes me so interested that I go up and read things. For instance, I remember it was early 80s, our family sponsored a Cambodian family to come over to the US. But this was not a time of the internet, so I couldn't really dig in and say, tell me about the Khmer Rouge. Tell me about,
Yeah.
So it was, your book sent me down a lot of fun rabbit holes. And I think that can be one of the neatest thing about writers of new fiction, even if it's conspiracy theory, I'm like, this clearly were events that happened. And here's events that happened, and realizing I don't know that much about these events, and it makes you go read them.
Yeah. I was lucky enough, well, there's a bad terminology. I was brought up in both the country areas of Ireland, but also in Belfast in the 1970s. So being surrounded by essentially, a civil war, we as a teenager, you get interested in other struggles around the world. And we got to see, it was very much over the news everywhere, what was happening in Cambodia or Kampuchea, whatever the French at the time. And we had the Vietnam War, we had Cambodia, we had all these things, King of Chile, and all these things. And being surrounded by violence, you kind of get interested in other violence, thinking, are we alone, or are people suffering the same as us? So I had read a lot about the Khmer Rouge at the time. I didn't want to linger on the Khmer Rouge. I wanted to be a pinpoint in time, but I wanted to be a formative thing for the characters, in that they were born of the very thing that they would eventually try to.
Absolutely. You have a soldier, you have a woman from a village, but it does make it interesting. I mean, the big picture that you draw from it, I love universal conspiracy theories in this way, because there are a lot of romances, and the way that the media influences a lot of it controls the narrative. Like, there are people that have grown up in Britain their whole lives that think, oh, in Britain, we're jolly old England. I mean, the fact that you can say jolly old England without realizing England has done terrible things in the world. France has done horrible things in the world. America has done horrible. Nobody has a spotless past. And yet,
yes, that's a good point. It's a very good point.
Yeah, there is no perfect country that has done glorious things everywhere, because humans are messy.
There's zero. Like, being Irish, we have 100 years of essentially persecution and famine and everything. And Cromwell's, he was essentially trying to wipe out the Gaels. We had all that. However, if you actually read history and you go back to when the Roman regime in Britain fell, so basically the Romans went into to Britain, Romanized the Celts that were there, and then just went home a couple of 100 years later and left a massive vacuum. Now, the Irish were raiders at that time. They were hopping across and raiding and doing things. So we don't have a perfect past either,
Yeah. And Cormac McCart, the Robert Howard's The Irish Reaver, you got a lot of that even if you just read old fantasy, because it was still historic fantasy.
Yeah, so we grew up to learn that the Viking raids in Ireland were a bad thing and all the rest. But we were doing a fair part. A few hundred years before that, we were doing a fair crack of it ourselves. We were hopping across to Wales and Cornwall and taking their stuff.
Well, I mean, being an Irish must have this a fabulous influence. When you look at Belfast had a little bit more of the north, and then Dublin has the raiders of everybody from the south, from the Vikings, from the Celts, from all of the different pieces, layer by layer, built into every city.
Yeah. Dublin is a Viking city, and Kinsale and those kind of areas as well. The thing about I lived in Denmark for 10 years, and the interesting thing about the Vikings is that they got a very bad press. Yeah, they weren't nice. But the vast majority, so the guys used to go and raid and get stuff and then go home and they go look at all our stuff. But in the same time, there was other ones who just went, oh, why don't we just stay here and get on with the people around us and grow some crops?
Farming is better. Look at this farmland.
And that is, as I say, I apologize if I go off at tangents because my head explodes with stuff. But I always loved that one about the Genghis Khan and the Mongols. Whenever they came in, they basically, one of the greatest empires and hugest empires that the world's ever seen.
Yeah.
And they came all the way to Europe. And then Genghis Khan got sick and they decided to go home. But some just went, nah, I'm just going to stay here. And they did that all along the way. So that's why you have these little pockets all over Asia and some areas of Eastern Europe where you can map the DNA of Mongolian people from the Genghis Khan invasions. I just love that idea. I love the idea of people just go, nah, I'm just there.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, because my husband's English, and I have traveled through England just because I liked it. And York, most of the street names and stuff are named because of the Vikings.
Yeah, that came from Danelaw, the Danelaw area that was after Ragnar Lothbrok came over and he did his thing, and there was kind of, the Alfred backwards and forwards and the marshes and getting the army together and all this. It was Danelaw, which was essentially from the Midlands up to that area. Like, we lived in a town called Sileby for a while, me and my wife, in Leicestershire. Now, the BY on the end in Danish is Bu, which means town.
Oh. Ha,
so
I love it.
So we are thinking that was the town of somebody called Silas or Sila. So it was Silabu, that's how you pronounce it in Danish. And it's a name that would be quite at home in Denmark or Norway.
Well, if you asked the standard American on the street, what is the basis of your system of laws, there are very few people that understand our laws are, if you go back in time far enough, it's Danelaw, Vergild.
It is Danelaw. We're slightly different in Ireland because we come from the Brehon laws, which were the Celtic laws.
Exactly.
But there was a merge.
There was. Anglo-Saxons, they're very big on courts, but I like the moot. Except for, of course, in America, we have Louisiana, which is based on old Roman law. But that's just because we have French action.
Okay, is that right? That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have one state that it is very hard as a lawyer from another state to go practice law in Louisiana and vice versa.
They have the same in Britain, in that Scottish law is based on the Brehon laws.
Yeah.
From when the Scots went over to Scotland, which were Gaels from Ireland. So their law tends to be based more on Brehon law than Anglo-Saxon law, which is Danelaw. So that is why there has to be whole levels of study to do this, and that's why buying a house in Scotland is a completely different procedure to England, and likewise in Ireland is a completely different procedure to England.
I can see that, but in the Logos prophecy in your book, you also have a combination of symbols, which was interesting because you said, "Here's 3 spirals in this kind of a cross, but it is a religious cross or a crossroads or a different thing." And I don't want to give it too much away because we want people to go buy The Fall of the Ancients, book 1. But do we get all of our spirals then from the Danish, really? Because they were the ones who brought it to Ireland.
No, actually, it's prior to that. It actually comes from the Mesolithic peoples.
Okay.
That went into. There's an interesting thing I know. The interesting thing about the Mesolithic people in Ireland, in that none of them remain. In every other country, Mesolithic led to Neolithic, which led to the modern age or whatever, the Iron Age and all. But the Mesolithic people actually died out. And now the Neolithic people were the spiral people, but it's believed that there was some prior to that. I'm not an archaeological expert. I can't give you definite on that. But yeah, they come from the spiral. The triscale is pre-Iron Age.
Well, then tell us a little bit about the research that you did, because this has a little bit of metaphysics, a little bit of modern quantum physical theory, a whole lot of archaeological interest. Tell us about the research and how did you sort it and decide what you were going to put in?
Well, it was a bit like the conspiracy theories. Funny, I did an interview the other day, and they were asking me, how did you pick the conspiracy theories? And I said, well, I had to pick the direction and the narrative of the book itself, how I wanted the book to go, and then cherry pick the conspiracy theories that would fit that. And I did the same with the history. So basically, because like conspiracies and history, it's vast, it's huge. So I went to try and find a way of grounding that, particularly on the history. I tried to find similarities around the world, things that even though historically or archaeologically they don't overlap, they could be perceived to overlap given the idea that the story is everything's based in conspiracy theory. So that's what I did. I tried to find similarities around the world and where things could bolt together.
Now, I want to ask a pure tools question because we have a couple friends that say they live and die for note-keeping via Scrivener. Are you a electronic tool person, or do you have 1,000 notebooks, or is there secretly somewhere something with pictures on your wall and a bunch of red yarn putting it all together? Tell us about that.
I have a notebook here in front of me. I have a notebook here to my side. I have paper in the top drawer. And I have a color note on my phone. Color note gets most of it because it's the one I use when I'm out in a coffee shop. So I just go, and get my phone out and I write it into the color note thing. But when I'm sitting at my desk, everything else goes into these two notebooks, which being an engineer has a system. So the one to my left is book-related actual narrative and story. And the one in front of me is things I have to do.
Can I ask something incredibly personal then? Nobody's ever admitted to just having this and separating it that way. Read us one line from each.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, randomly. Open it up.
Okay, randomly.
I kind of want to dive into your brain in a coffee shop here.
So there's no such thing as free will. So this is actually from the book. So Matthias, again, check Ari's last text. So there's no such thing as free will. There is just control. And that's from that. So that was an actual dialogue I wanted to put in the book. All right. And this other one is things I have to do. Dublin show. I have to get it in by the 29th of March. I've got Jeannie, Chaz, and Karen in here. And I've got Twitter campaign, and I've got contact for the review RE books for backing. So that's those two. And on color note, which is the more fun thing because this is where my mind goes nuts. I finished the first of a fantasy trilogy, and in this one I've got some notes I put in. So one of them is death claimed him in the worst way possible, buried beneath an avalanche of rock, mud, and gravel. So that's something I will want to put into the book.
I like it.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful because we have so many, I think people have an illusion that, oh yes, writers just sit around comfortably, by their fireplace writing. And that's the meticulous organization and note taking and writing things down and keeping track is important. And I love that you're able to illustrate that your life is not more free form. It's almost less free form because you've chosen to herd all of this together in your brain.
Yeah, it's the thing about it for me is I either witness, hear, or think of something that fits perfectly with the story. And like Stephen King and his what ifs, for example, he's standing in a grocery store and then he has a what if moment. What if, I always loved that one about the mist. When he wrote The Mist, he was standing in a grocery store and he thought, what if a pterodactyl just smashed through the window and skirted down that aisle, throwing boxes of Kellogg's cornflakes and everything all over the place? Right? And that says what if, and then the story comes from that. Me, I can, in a similar way, I'd be standing and I'll hear somebody shout at each other, like something like, hey, Dermot, where did you get your lawnmower? you know, and I go, oh, that would fit lovely because it's live and it's happening and it fits with storytelling. Because one of the things that I've noticed over the years as I got more writery, I noticed how soapy things get in books, as in like soap operas. People like to identify with the people that they're in. They like to feel at home in the book. So even though you're writing something on Alpha Centauri with dimension hopping space aliens, people like to know that the people that are in the book are relatable. That's where the likes of Battlestar Galactica went very good with the remake. We got to really know the characters. Or The Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah.
We got to really know the characters.
I actually have noticed that others have talked about it too, but in a trend, when I read older written science fiction from the 60s to even the 80s, you didn't get a lot of the emotion, not just emotional, but all of the crazy things that characters think, their insecurities, their life, their fact that, we are all on a spectrum somewhere. And how much of that to put in or not to put in is an interesting balance and dance, because you have a character that is deeply, deeply into conspiracy theories, which mean for me spoke to, this is a person with anxiety, and an interesting way of how do they balance with a person that's less who studies them, but from a more intellectual point of view. So you have two completely different brains that you're balancing, telling their stories through the book. And it's cool.
You're coming from where the brainchild of it essentially came for the two characters, because we've got this conspiracy theorist who is like, she's at the bottom of the rabbit hole in belief system. And we've got this guy who likes bizarre stuff, but he's trying to prove it in science. And I went, what if we just hit them off each other?
Yes.
And see what happens, And when we throw in that she's a backstreet London, first generation from Cambodian Chinese background. He's a guy from New York with an Irish parent and a Caribbean mother. They're very far apart. She's raw and ready. He's academically trained. Let's throw them together and give them an impossible task.
Yeah. Do your thing, your thing.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Is they're like, do the weird mojo thingy.
Yeah, that's it. You must be able to do so. This is your thing. Well, it's your thing, and I wanted that to be, and that's where the soapy thing comes in, is that if you had a real life situation where, say, you got two work colleagues and one was a conspiracy and the other one was a physics academic, and they had a problem to solve that was going to change the universe, it would get soapy. They have to relate with each other. They have to build a relationship and be interconnected. So, that was fun.
Yeah.
Particularly, Ari has a colourful turn of phrase.
Yeah.
Now, you've written, before we got to this beautiful glory of conspiracy theory and how I'm going to call it the universal conspiracy theory, you had a couple other fun things you've published out there. For instance, I didn't actually read them yet, but I giggled wildly that you have the Tales of Trumple Thinskin.
Yeah, that's it.
You have Tiny Hands Press. I literally snorted my coffee, so thank you for that moment of pain, because that was hilarious.
Yeah, that's actually the same publishers as this. That's another one there. That's their comedy imprint. I'm kind of the first guy with this publisher. This is the thing. They're a new venture, Trips Publishing. They've got two imprints. One is this, the Fire Hornet Codex, which is for stuff like The Locust Prophecy and some other urban fiction, which another writer that's been brought into the stable, Steve Bowden, he's going to publish soon, hopefully. And then the other side was the Tiny Hands Press, which was born out of Trumple Thinskin to be a comedy satire, comedy books essentially imprint. So,
good satire is important. I mean, years ago, I belonged to a group called Society for Creative Anachronism, and a couple guys wrote some group satire of this as if it were real. And then there's another version out now called The Scallion, and some people are like, how dare they do satire? Like, if you think it's about you, then maybe you should examine yourself, because if somebody can satire you so completely and you feel like they're making fun of you, maybe you should do a little bit more navel gazing in the world.
Yes,
The
absolutely.
funny thing is, the people who are the best ones to satirize are the ones who don't realize that they have the multitude of traits that make that satire so easy.
Exactly.
Like, there was no difficulty in doing Trumpel Thin Skin.
No.
I always get that great quote of Tina Fey's when she was doing, I've forgotten her name.
Palin.
Oh yeah,
Palin. Yeah, when she was doing Palin, and she was doing it on Saturday Night Live, and somebody in an interview asked her, how do you make it so funny? And she said, well, I dress up to look exactly like Palin, and I say everything that she says in exactly the same way she says it.
Yeah.
And therein lies the comedy.
That's true. I mean, I was so embarrassed when she was front and center, when she was like running for things and stuff. It was just a national embarrassment.
My only comfort is the more that we study politics all around the globe, the more that we realize that everybody's a little bit embarrassed right now in their country.
Everybody's embarrassed. Everybody.
I mean, the Italians just got something annoying back again.
Yeah. And
we all have those parties because there's always somebody that, wants to be mean or blame somebody else because it helps them get more money and more wealth. And that's what I love about these your conspiracy theories, is that you give the why and what if, and the what if in the conspiracy theory as sort of meta satire science fiction makes this really fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, because that was the intention. The intention actually was, look, it's the same thing as with doing the Trumpel Thin Skin books. There must be something we can do. It's an election year, it's 2020, and there's a big election, and it's probably the biggest election there's been for a long time, with Biden against Donald Trump. It was, it mattered a lot, not only to the United States, but to the world. It was a big deal. And it's the same with these conspiracy theories. They've become everywhere. Whole media budgets are spent on conspiracy theories. Like the Ancient Aliens television, and I do invert air quotes, documentary, is one of the best funded documentaries I've ever seen. And it's like, to say it's spurious is mild. So I thought, like, there's all this money coming into this, and there's conspiracy theories everywhere, particularly around the COVID outbreak and whatever. And I went, there must be mileage in this, in that it has become a worldview, and therefore we must be able to make some entertaining stories out of it.
I really enjoyed it. And when are we expecting the next one out?
2 years.
Okay.
Is the plan.
2 years.
2 years. January 23 was this one, January 25 is the next one, and then January 27. That's the plan, to give plenty of time for things to bed in, basically for people to have some fun with it.
I think it's just gonna get weirder. And are we expecting more out of good old Helma? I was just in Boston, just got back this morning, so I was very delighted to discover that you had a Boston PD. And like, now that I've been in Boston, your book is very plausible.
Okay, yeah. The whole Boston cop detective thing, it's fascinating. I was going to put them in New York, but then I thought no, because I think Boston's edgier.
Boston there were more churches. It caught me by surprise of seeing how many churches there are in downtown Boston.
And the lead character, well, not the lead character is the detective, but the lead,
Jeremiah Poots,
he's well, I'll not give too much away, but he's a pastor. He's running a little small cult, so it fits well with Boston. It fitted perfect with Boston. The more I talk to people who I know from Boston,
yeah, Boston is in fact a very interesting place, and there's still a very strong Irish contingent, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And I have actually seen race riots between Irish and non-Irish white people fighting in the streets.
The Irish Italian and Irish Russian is very interesting there.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that, as I said, you could have done New York, but New York has a defined identity. New York is essentially a country on its own. You got the United States, and then you've got New York. There's only a handful of cities around the world that can say that. London would be another one. They're in the country, but not off the country.
I would argue that LA also is its own. Los Angeles is its own. Yeah.
But Boston is definitely it's born of the United States, and it's born of the hundreds of years that formed it, and the comings and goings of the various migrations of people that come in and out and settled and were prejudiced against and then rose to power and whatever. And it has spiky edges to it, and that's why I liked the idea of a cop who is pissed off with everything, living in a place that works her hard.
Well, there's many Americans that aren't even aware of the Boston Tea Party, the whole, oh yes, we're doing it for the tax on tea. I'm like, do you guys actually realize that the British removed the tax on tea? So all of our boys that were turned out later to be in government were actually tea smugglers.
Yeah.
And their business was undercut by a lack of taxation. So
yeah, you got businessman.
We were a nation built on a conspiracy theory. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Which nation isn't?
Right. What advice would you give to a young writer starting out?
Oh, that's a question. Read until, just read and read a diverse amount of books. So have your sci-fi period, have your fantasy period, and do a lot of nonfiction. Instead of researching and your research showing, essentially, your wealth of knowledge that you've built into yourself makes the research that you build it and put into your fiction books and stories a lot easier, I think. And the other one is short story your brain out. Just keep doing short stories. And then there's a point, I think there's a switch point. I don't know whether you agree. There's a switch point and when you're doing short stories where you actually go, do you know, I might be good enough to have a crack at a long piece.
Or somebody in your reading group happens to look and say, yeah, Jeannie, this is a novel, not really a short story. And
yes, that happens.
It does. We will put links to the fascinating things we discussed during this episode on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. Martin, this has been wonderful. It's been delightful. Thank you for coming on our show.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Everybody, go out and read The Logos Prophecy. It's out on Fire Hornet Codex 2023. You're going to love it. It's so much fun. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineers and backup web spiders are David Welsh and John Schmidt. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with the Morning Person, performed by Michael Langberg. You can hear more from Michael on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsors are Jackal Designs and any decent coffee shop that actually opens before 8 a.m. because come on, people. And hey, thanks for listening.